We want to look at some political forces that have been acting and some geopolitical, very interesting things that have happened as well. If we have time, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about some of the morality of the world and maybe even financially, although I'm not a specialist in that area at all. Might have to call Matt up. He might know a little bit more about that than me. But in any case, the other thing is the clock at the back is actually 10 minutes slow. So if I go past 7 o'clock, wave your hands. I'm not going to be embarrassed. Matt will probably throw something at me. I might miss that or turn the projector off. But if I run over time, please tell me, because I might be being misled by a clock that's out. Maybe your first thought, though, in looking back over 2024 is that nothing really remarkable happened. And in some ways, 2024 could be described as a steady type of year. There was no new major conflict involving multinational armies like we saw maybe a decade ago. There was no 9/11 catastrophe. There was no global financial crisis that might be coming. There was no COVID pandemic to deal with. And so in a sense, 2024 offered a little bit of relief from those great climactic and upheavals that have happened in the past. But let me assure you that it was not a year that was inconsequential. 2024, in my opinion, as a Bible student, marked a steady march of maybe seemingly unremarkable events that to Bible students indicate a general trend and development that should be observed very closely. And I encourage you to keep an eye on emerging world events and global trends because as Bible students and hopefully people that can read and interpret prophecy, we see those kind of things rolling on and it's very, very interesting to see. So have no fear. It might not have been something catastrophic happened, but the steady march of time, the unfolding of world events is of great interest to Bible students. I think it was the British-American philosopher Aldous Huxley that said that men do not learn very much from the lessons of history is the most important of all lessons of history. So, be alert to things that have happened in the past. One phenomena of the Bible is its prophetical content. That is a message that has the ability to define and reveal elements of the world that we're currently living in, as predicted many, even thousands of years ago. For example, there was allusions in that chapter. Now, this chapter in Ezekiel 38, we normally go to talk about, Russia and the invasion of the Middle East. And last year saw a somewhat mellowed Russia in terms of activity, but more a focus on Israel. So we're going to take tonight is Israel-centric. There's no doubt about that because they've been probably in our newspapers most significantly through 2024. But for instance, way back in Ezekiel's time, maybe 2,300 years, 2,400 years ago, he issued this little phrase that they would be a nation, in verse 8, gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel, which have always been waste. So in a very, very short turn of phrase, 2 or 3 sentences, we've got the history of Israel captured in a little verse in Ezekiel 38. It was brought forth out of the nations, and they shall draw safety, all of them. So although it may have been an unremarkable year, there's these little indicators that we should be watching closely to see what Israel is doing and what events are affecting them on the global stage. It is something of an exciting year because of that for Christadelphians. And for Christadelphians and Bible students, Bible prophecy becomes the staff upon which our hope leans. It is the substance upon which hope for the future comes and supports. And this is, we've seen in consistent revealing of historical events like the return of Israel to their land on what is stated by Ezekiel as the mountains of Israel. They were never known as the mountains of Israel until, recent history. But there it is in black and white on the page for us this evening. Some prophecies span a great period of time and some a short period of time. All of them fascinating in their content and applicable and interesting for us today. The content of the year then in review is an opportunity for us to be aware of political maybe and geographical influencing powers, because the Bible has broad-ranging language that tells us what is happening. Therefore, we have the ability then to interpret the context of the biblical timeline of 7,000 or so years. So our agenda this evening, what are we going to talk about? Let's see if we can go to the next slide. So we've introduced it as a biblical perspective. We want to have a look at some major events shaping our world in 2024, some political events, some natural disasters and environment, increases in war. And my own commentary is that there appears to be no relief in sight. That's a blight for mankind, but it is the facts. Middle Eastern region, geopolitical issues. So things that are happening in that location are very specifically, very critical and very interesting to watch as in review of last year. And then hopefully at the end, if we get time, increasing complexity of life and economic pressure. And so that's probably a modern phenomenon that is starting to occur with the level of automation, artificial intelligence and other things. And of course, that made a large emergence onto the scene in 2024. So that's certainly an interesting factor to consider. And potentially, if we get time, what do Bible students or Bible readers expect in 2025? Because unless it gives us confidence in the future, there is little point in having a review of 2024. How does others see it though? Well, here's another perspective that's maybe not quite as positive as Bible readers. This is, of course, one summary of a longer term view of unfolding history over the last 20-something years. And this is data collected by the so-called Doomsday Clock Committee. They are, of course, scientists that measure the world's closeness to nuclear war. They've been recording the level of global stress, that is the tension between nuclear-armed powers since the first nuclear weapons were used in 1945 with devastating results. And they are on a steady march to 12 o'clock is the phrase that they use. The seconds invariably ticking away, indicating the closeness of a possible nuclear war. And of course, over the last, since 2012, it was 5 minutes, 2015, 3, 2.5 in 2017, 2 minutes to midnight. 2020, there's no let up, 100 seconds. The kind of activity that happened in 2019 and 2020 led to a whole lot of concerns, an eruption of events around the world and upsets, till we get to 2023 where they make their prediction that it's 1.5 minutes or 90 seconds to midnight. They haven't yet released 2024. We can only assume that it's closer than 90 seconds. But that is one way of looking at things. Now, fortunately, the Christadelphians, while accepting the collection of data, we're not doomsday prophets. You may have heard of this kind of phraseology before. We do not believe that the world will be consumed in some kind of doomsday sort of fireball. We believe that God has a purpose with the earth. We believe that he intends to fill it with his glory. And fortunately, Bible students are very confident about the end point. And the Bible is very clear about that God has sworn that he will fill the earth with his glory, and his glory will exclude those that have the ability to destroy, harm, or decimate those that are around them. But there's also some very other interesting prophecies, and I just want to refer your attention to Matthew 24 in the context of this, because it's very important as Bible students to be aware of some of the parameters that affect prophecy. Matthew 24, and we'll read from verse 36, where the Lord Jesus Christ is addressing the people of his day in the early first century, before the early first century, between roughly AD 30. But of the day and hour knoweth no man, knows no, no, not the angels in heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day when Noah entered the ark. And they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. So his appeal is that being aware and knowing, and then furthermore, in verse 42, watch therefore. It's an imperative. Okay, it's as though a clock is ticking, isn't it? He's saying you need to stay alert, you need to stay awake, you need to observe what's going on around you, which is the reason we would do a review of world events like we're doing this evening. Of course, the opposite can be true, is that people that are watching can fall asleep, they're unable to foresee what is happening, and they become consumed in the destruction potentially of a city, as was the symbology used by Jesus Christ on this occasion. The Lord wanted each one of us to look out under the horizon, not bury our heads, not ignore what was going on, but be aware of events that are surrounding and affecting the world, because those events will be a foresign of things that happen when he comes to the earth again. And Christadelphians are passionate about people being prepared for that time of his coming. They want to warn the world, like good watchmen, that the hour of our Lord is coming. And our appeal to you is going to be, amongst other things this evening, is you must watch and be aware of what is going on, because there are historical warnings, unlike those that were caught in the flood, where they knew not, they were unaware, they were ignorant of things that came upon them. And so our appeal to you this evening will be to take away from this the ambition, the understanding that God has a point of reference for this world. He wants to secure the lives of those that are interested in him and determined to be part of his kingdom. So let's leave the doomsayers alone a little bit and look at what is maybe happening in the world. The BBC took a summary of 10 or so images and said, well, this is representative of what our world was like last in 2024. Unfortunately, there were no shimmering meadows with people frolicking around and having picnics. That's a significant disaster, isn't it, in terms of that? In fact, most of the images were very confronting. Some of them I'm not going to show this evening because they are gruesome, and we find all those things are happening. We can use words to describe them rather than that. But here's just 4 or 5 of them to reflect a little bit on what happened in our world last year, and not dissimilar to several other years that have gone past, but just to reflect. And these are a little bit confronting, so just have a think about these. Maybe you, like me, have become a little bit jaded by the repetition of images like we're seeing on the screen. This one speaks of a displaced family, desperate to salvage what they have, possibly a beaten up vehicle that would become their home. It is without doubt some of the most horrifying images when we see families suffering, fear in their eyes of young innocent children. And it's a picture that brings with it the fact that the world is facing greater, more increasing, more necessary humanitarian needs than ever before, as homelessness, loss and suffering are experienced. you might just see the mother's eyes peering beyond the backseat of that car, concerned. This is another image that really represents what we've seen in our newspapers throughout last year. Maybe we've become a little bit immune to this kind of picture. We saw many similar pictures earlier in the year of war zones flattened, cities with citizens, cities with families, and we do not condone those efforts, mixed obviously with militants, smoke rising out of buildings which have been either reduced to rubble or about to be reduced to rubble. And we reflect on what answer does man have for the trauma, grief, and horror of those scenes. This one actually in Yemen in December, as the Houthi rebels were attempted to be routed out of that place because of their support for Hezbollah and other radicals. Maybe this one is reflective of what we've seen through the year as well. Repeated many places throughout 2024, loss of the family home, people feeling, along with thousands and thousands of others, refuge, in temporary dwelling places, finding that it has become a normal way of life, salvaging what they can out of their meagre existence because of the effect or the or a war. This one in Sudan, because of a bitter civil war that seems to have no visible or foreseeable ending at the moment. Maybe this kind of image is the kind of thing that has also dulled our senses a little bit. Somebody fleeing a massive wildfire with their meagre belongings in a trolley behind them. Increase in fires that have ravaged the world in 2024. That's not an uncommon theme. And to the other end of the scale, floods that have also impacted people. This one, I think, in North Carolina, where there was a level of carnage caused because of floods. Also on the rise, and we'll have a look at some data a little bit later on to support that. So, on one hand, severe flooding, on another hand, severe wildfires because of heating of world temperatures and other natural phenomena that are happening. Maybe this was a picture that piqued your interest, to see the fallen image of Assad. Maybe somebody was happy to see that because of his brutal and ferocious leadership, a greedy leader that courted with Russia for weapons and repressed his people for nearly 30 years. A mixture of happiness, I suppose, in the case of some, but the upheaval in life very different to our own in what we might call settled Australia or the lucky country. So that kind of image came out in many different sort of styles and represented the ousting of a leader. And we're talking a bit about in our lecture about the way God influences leaders as well. That one sort of is iconic, I suppose, in so many ways as the representation of somebody who was a brutal leader gets dragged through the streets of Syria. Maybe this one, another force in the world was AI. And I noticed a headline just scrolling through that only very recently, in the last week or so, Apple has a lawsuit against them for active listening on your phone. So now it's getting a little bit closer to home, isn't it? Artificial intelligence, it's had a surge in use, and we wonder where it might end. Local cafes are using it now to determine best approach for menus. People are using it for new business systems. The steady march of automation has introduced many challenges. AI graphic images being generated for all kinds of reasons. AI generated information being the collective intelligence of the global network of information that now it runs in parallel to our lives. I was asked last year to do a review of some of those systems for a consultancy company that I work for, and interestingly, very few of them could actually generate some of the useful information needed in that kind of space. However, what they were able to do was provide massive information collected together and sort of summarised for you. So there was some uses there. But AI has interestingly become a part of each one of our lives. Just in the last week or so, I went onto Copilot, Microsoft Copilot. It's available, I think, with all Microsoft product. And I thought, well, you know, where has this come to? You know, and I deliberately asked a vague question. In my mind, major events of 2024 might be something that might be of interest to me. I didn't define what kind of events. I didn't inform or request a style of information. I thought, well, what is the global summary of major events? What is the theme that is being collected? And really what I got a list was a list of the Paris Olympics, some major concerts and entertainments, and a few sports events. And so if that is the collective summary of major events of 2024, then I think AI has probably failed us significantly. AI cannot provide the wisdom and the forward-looking knowledge and hope that the Bible, it is really a residual collection of facts as determined by essentially databases through the world. So AI is limited unless it's contained and properly referenced. It will, of course, has its place, as I'm sure anybody that works in most of the software packages that are available now, you know, when it's used properly. However, to lean on it is you know, fraught with danger. To depend upon it is going to be asking for you know, a serious shortfall in useful information. So although we might be becoming dependent on AI, I caution a warning about what it really has. But it's not all doom and gloom. And of course, the iconic emojis there of doom and gloom. There's some parameters we must look at in the context of world leadership and control. When we look, I'm not a political commentator or analyst, I'm a Bible student. And here's the overarching summary of the appointment of, or God's involvement in the appointment of world leaders. So come back with us to the prophecy of Daniel, where Daniel was asked a question by the greatest world leader of the day. And things troubled him. He had a dream. And in that dream, he saw various elements of you know, symbologies that he didn't understand. And he rejected the counsel of his own wise men, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the soothsayers of his day. And he went to a man called Belshazzar, whose name was Daniel, who was the author of this book. And in the middle of that speech, in that dream that he had this perception. He was influenced in his dream and came to this conclusion. He says in verse 17, "This matter is by the decree of the watchers, and the demand by the word of the holy ones." We believe that's a reference to the angels of God. And he's acknowledging the presence of God and people or angels, messengers that work for him, to the intent, he says, that the living, now he's carrying a message, okay, to Daniel to understand what this means, this whole dream means. And he says, to the intent that the living may know what? That the Most High, and that's a reference to the God of heaven, rules in the kingdom of men, of which his kingdom was the greatest, and giveth it, he says, to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. So this is one of the biblical parameters that envelop or provide a context for how God works in the lives of world leaders, and as we've seen over the last year. So things that have happened are not random events or accidental forces of nature. the Bible very clearly states that God, the Most High, rules or affects the elements of change in the kingdoms of men. And collectively, the nations on the globe are the kingdoms of men. And what Nebuchadnezzar, the king, is querying in his dream is, tell me more about this God, because he is going to influence my world. This dream, he says, I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now, Belteshazzar, tell me who it is. And Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, in verse 19, goes on to explain the dream. And he talks about the verse 24, this is the interpretation, and this is the decree of the Most High, which is come upon my Lord the King. Okay, and he goes to explain and validate that it is God that's influencing even the most powerful ruler of the day, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. And of course, he was to be sent out for a number of years and humbled because of that. He later came to the conclusion at the end of that chapter, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honour the King of heaven. Sorry, this is verse 37. All whose works are truth and his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride he is able to abase. So that is the general parameter of Bible prophecy and the influence that God has in the affairs of mankind, particularly as described here, the kingdom of men. So when we look at political events, when we look at rulers that have started and stopped, when we look at our election results, that's the biblical parameter that we've got to apply over it. I think when somebody was looking at the end of 2023, they described 2024 as the year of the vote because there were, more than 50%, I think the actual percentage is 51% of the world population went to polls last year, some equitable and some less equitable, but 51% of the world went to the polls. But very few people would have believed, as they wrote down their voting instructions, that God was influencing things to have an outcome, as we'll see. And the outcome was in the chapter that we read in Ezekiel 38. And God is, of course, the master controller of world events. And for that, Christadelphians say it is not all doom and gloom. And so we're able to see in the things that have happened, the hand of God as he, like a master chess player, moves elements of the world's powers to suit his will. So let's consider just a few of those when it comes to politics. We saw in 2024 maybe the surprising re-election of former President Donald Trump. He was facing charges that have now been suspended until the end of his term, and he made a surprising comeback by winning in quite a large manner the US elections. And that event was described by newspapers as a shifting of the plates. Now, what they meant by that is they're using the analogy of the global tectonic plates. And of course, when tectonic plates shift, you get earthquakes, tsunamis, you get volcanoes, you get all kinds of upset. And political analysers are saying that was a significant shift. He appealed, of course, that photo, we probably got sick of seeing that one, of the near assassination of the president at one of his rallies, and of course the resultant effect that it had. And the question Christadelphians have is, well, what part of that was God influencing in the context of the long-term plan of biblical prophecy? One very stubborn fact remains, is that unlike Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, Donald Trump is an ardent supporter of the Jews and the Israeli nation. He supports their bold initiatives. And for Bible students, although we have seen that relationships stretched through the Gaza war, it looks like they will continue to support them, which may not have been the case if Kamala Harris had taken. She was a very different persuasion. She had no time for that kind of influence. And of course, Donald Trump came to power, influencing the thing. And in some ways, people are fearful of that, particularly the Ukrainians. But other people are saying, well, I can see that the shift in power is going to have an impact in the Middle East. And of course, he promised to finish a war in a day. He started those discussions with the Ukraine and influencing Russia. Whether that proves to be the case or not will be seen a little bit when he's sworn into office. But there is a very significant change in world politics that happened in 2024, maybe surprisingly to most of us. Another one was the Syrian presidential overthrow. So as we've said, after years of civil unrest, the overflowing resistance in that country, all of a sudden a president is ousted, a brutal and, we could almost call him a megalomaniac, and once again, a shift in policies. They were, of course, largely supported by Russian money, but Russia distanced themselves from Syria. But what our Bible students expect is what we see back in Ezekiel 38, where we expect to see, although this is a minor shift, we expect to see Syria and Libya aligned with Russia and the relationship continuing to grow. And so I ask you to watch that scene because although Assad himself has fled to Russia for protection, the Syrian nation is significantly changed. And of course, in the middle of all that, Israel is making incursions into it and destroying parts of their program, which was bold and aggressive on the part of Israel. And we've seen Middle East tensions, wars, and peace negotiations. We'll go a little bit more into that a bit later, but there is certainly an increase in the tensions involving and the resultant protests as well. And that is spilled across into our cities, in Sydney and Melbourne in particular, more than Adelaide, but people protesting those various wars and the reaction that came from that. The efforts of Netanyahu and his government have been relentless after, of course, the October 2023 incursion by those from Gaza. And, of course, they've taken the opportunity to relentlessly retrieve the hostages in one case and demilitarize the areas that have caused them significant grief over many, many years. And of course, there's a battalion taking a selfie. That would have to be a 2024 photo, wouldn't it, of a victory with a war-torn city that they've relieved in there. So what did Bible students expect? Well, in our reading this evening, we expect to see Israel in a time of strength, a time when they say, we have no need. They dwell safely in verse 11 of Ezekiel 38 and dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. Okay? And we expect to see a confident, a arrogant even Israel. We expect to see a determined, self-preserving nation, which is one of those issues that has emerged as they've dealt blow after blow against various people that have been an ongoing thorn in their side for many, many years. And of course, interesting major policy shift. Finally, the EU has a Green Deal, carbon neutrality, they're saying, by 2050. And what's remarkable about it, this is not the Green Deal that was done but the fact that there was a strengthening of unity around a common man-made goal to green the earth. And of course, people thought people thought that was a remarkable thing that could even happen. So Europe is starting to unify. Now, Bible students are expecting a strongly unified Europe as an opposing force in Ezekiel 38. So watch the European space. It's maybe not a big deal. There's certainly nothing in Bible prophecy that says that a Green Deal is going to be part of that unifying thing. But what we do know is that unify they will, and they will unify on man-made policies. And we're seeing that. So just another interesting little blip and a little flag waving for European cohesion. On the other scene, natural disasters and environment, we've spoken a little bit about that. We've talked about the ongoing concern, of extreme weather events, mostly because of this graph, which was a record of the hottest day ever on record in 2024, following, I think, the last hottest day on record, which was in June the 6th, 2023, at just, 0.6 degrees lower or something like that. Sorry, 0.15 degrees lower. Consistently, what's worrying about this is maybe not the point, but the consistent red area of hot or temperature increasing over that. So this has people like this particular, it's called the Copernicus Climate Change Service, that records a lot of data on the Earth temperature, including polar ice caps and other things, rising sea levels, which are a consequence of heat and melting ice caps. And of course, that kind of data is, of course, a worrying trend and will and has continued through 2020. There's been no relief from that. Their kind of comments end up saying things like, what is truly staggering, and this is the words of this Copernicus Climate Change data collection service, is what is truly staggering is how large the difference is between the temperature of the last 13 months and the previous temperature records. And of course, that is a global concern that is still creeping along in the wrong direction, and causing, it's no longer environmentalists that are worried about this. It's people that are providing humanitarian, healthcare, food supply, water supply that are starting to get very, very worried about this trend. The other thing I think, and probably largely concerning, is this. We live in a world that is actually at war. I'm not saying it's World War III or anything like that. What I'm saying is that there's a large portion of the world that is currently at war, okay, with a majority of these conflicts having, started earlier than 2024 and just continued. And so we've become a little bit immune to some of the numbers, on these kind of graphs. This is the number of deaths, and this is really, from anybody's point of view, a tragedy. Some of the numbers there are, Ukraine, I think it's 29,000 deaths. Back in Syria, 6,000 there, 1,000 in Iraq, 18,000 in the West Bank, 13,000, down in Sudan, 4,000 down further in Ethiopia and other regions. There is an ongoing and devastating impact of war. The wars that defined 2023 and 2024, the Russia and Ukraine war, the conflict which began in 22 has continued to be one of the most intense and devastating. Russia has made, in the terms of the commentators, slow but steady gains in Ukraine's east, while Ukraine has launched counteroffensives. And of course, they've been emboldened by the use of new technology like drones. They've been emboldened to go and strike things like oil facilities. They've been emboldened to go and take out ships and other things. So this Ukraine war continues continues through with horrible results for human lives. Israel-Palestinian conflict. The conflict has seen a significant escalation following the October 2023, and Israel has responded with large-scale military operations. Now, we want to look a little bit closer at those, so we won't go on with that. Myanmar civil war. Okay, the rebels making significant territorial gains against the junta. Sudan civil war, the conflict between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary group Rapid Support Forces, causing widespread devastation. And of course, the Yemen conflict. It's seen the Houthi rebels attacking ships and other targets. And of course, that big blotch of red in the northern South Africa is of course, a sad story to tell. Because of this kind of imagery that gets passed around. Now, this is, of course, a telling sight. This was Houthi rebels in Yemen that are making a statement of commitment to Hezbollah and other radical groups. And, of course, the Bible describes this kind of element in Joel chapter 3, saying, proclaim this among the nations, consecrate for war, stir up the mighty men, let all men of war draw near. This is the elements that will be prior to the coming of Christ to the earth again. He says, beat your plowshares, that is the implements you're using to make food, into swords, and your pruning hooks, also instruments of agriculture, into spears. And he says, let the weak say, I am strong, or as the ESV translates it, I'm a warrior. Okay, and we're seeing, of course, that kind of attitude in these horrible pictures that I'm not going to leave. There's, we've become a little bit immune, don't we, to seeing devastating rows of body bags lined up. We've become a little bit jaded when we have to see that again. And there, of course, is an appeal on a wall in Israel, bring them home now after October 2023. And, of course, that has kept going, hasn't it? And there's no relief in sight, other than the fact that we're now seeing, those in the Gaza Strip pushed out. Desperate people that are left homeless because of that. But look at the sentiment of world leaders and consider some of the persistence in war. And I think that's the chilling part of this, okay? Here's a former Russian president saying, war is the only way to peace in the Middle East. It's former President Medvedev. Here's the newly appointed Chief of General Staff of the United Kingdom Army. We've got 3 years to prepare for war, he says in the Times in July, as he saw a new axis form, North Korea, China, and other influencing powers. And he says, we've got 3 years. We are worried. Like Joel said, prepare for war. Get ready for a time of strife. Another comment, Israel is winning the war but losing the world. And so popular opinion is turning against Israel because of their persistence. And of course, they've faced many fronts, which we'll have a look at. Here's a comment from the Sydney Morning Herald, normally not what I would quote from, but one that caught my attention. Iran tried to light a ring of fire, but now Israel wields a blowtorch. And really what that reflects on is that Israel take a very extremely aggressive stance for any indication or any infringement. And of course, that has been the theme of 2024 in terms of Israel, is an incursion was made and a brutal, repressive and consistent response was given by Israel. And we're not agreeing with that approach. What we're saying is that has been the standard of warfare for 2024 in terms. In actual fact, Israel have long sought to relieve the pressure of the neighbours that have caused them significant amounts of issue. So this is what we're seeing. We're seeing a nation that is defiant. This is a list of where they've principally spent their time and effort over the last year. War in Gaza, Operation Summer Camps. Oh, sorry, let's just go through one of these one by one. This was actually the war down the bottom in the Gaza Strip, that little strip of land on the edge of the Mediterranean Sea and the border of Egypt, and basically routed out, forcefully clearing tunnels, secretive control rooms and infrastructure that the Hamas leadership, and essentially destroying that Hamas force from that area. The world was aghast at the complexity of the infrastructure, secure rooms, blast-proof areas, well-organised structure underground, basically which it has funded over the last 20 years in humanitarian aid for Gaza. And the world was aghast to see the extent and the hundreds and hundreds of kilometres of tunnels that were exposed, and obviously then became a threat for Israel. Operation Summer Camps, a large-scale military operation in the West Bank aimed at stopping Palestinian militant activity. After the Hamas-led invasion of October 23 that used guerrilla activity, since that time and through 2024, Israel has continued a steady and forceful clearing of another batch of tunnels and secure rooms and military infrastructure in that area. And we've had the horror of hospitals and schools and other places of community interest being bombed because they house, of course, military caches or at least organised military resistance. They've also been involved in Operation Northern Arrows, an offensive in northern Israel targeting Hezbollah later in 2024, involving significant airstrikes, ground manoeuvres in the Lebanon area, mainly to rout out the military and protect their northern borders, which have been a scourge for the last 10 years, and principally since they were established as a nation. Historically, they were slowly being abandoned by Israel due to persistent rocket attacks, and of course, Israel routed that part and secured their northern borders again. There was an invasion of Syria in December, capturing several towns and advancing beyond the buffer zone, emboldened activity that seemed unremarkable in our news, but many believe led to the final downfall of Assad, and armed rebels were obviously to take Syrian city of Damascus. The move comes after 13 years of civil wars and brings an ironclad rule of Assad regime effectively to a close. Then, of course, way down this little arrow down the bottom, airstrikes on Yemen on the 27th, so very, very close to the end of the year. Israel struck multiple targets linked to the Iran-aligned Houthi movement in Yemen, including the airport and other military infrastructure. So Israel has been very, very active in securing its borders and reducing the strength of military pressure around them. Now, that's exactly what we expect to see in Ezekiel 38. And verse 11 we read, and thou shalt say, this is the aggressor in 38, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. That means he will descend, he will go to the place of Israel. He will come from the north and head south, and I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. Okay? And that's exactly what Bible students expect to see in the coming months as Israel secures all those areas that have been a threat to them for many, many years. Verse 14 goes on to say, and this is really the subtext of the story rather than the main import, but it's very interesting when we carefully read our Bible. Verse 14, therefore, son of man, prophesy and say unto Gog, that is the Russian host. Thus saith the Lord God, in that day when my people of Israel dwell safely, shalt thou not know it. Okay? That they are endeavouring to secure their own borders. For Bible students, that is probably the most remarkable thing that we've seen in 2024. We are seeing an emerging, confident, powerful nation who has taken significant steps, despite protests around the world, to secure their own secure their own borders. We don't have time to go into the increasing complexity of life because our time is finished, but we want to take this message away from you this evening. We want to take this message away. It's contained in Luke 21, and I want to read it from the ESV version, where the Lord Jesus Christ says there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. That means, and we've looked at signs in leading powers, which sun, moon, and stars represent. He says, and on the earth, distress of nations in perplexity. We don't have the resources, or don't know the resources, or can't understand the complexity of some of these things. Why? Because of the roaring of the seas and waves. Nations pushing and thrusting is what the sea and the waves represent. And he says, people fainting with fear and with foreboding of what is coming on the world. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And of course, the Lord Jesus Christ accurately describes the fear and the complexity, the tectonic plate shift of nations and the fear it brings. And of course, Christadelphians looking at this, and Bible students say, then they shall see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. And the encouraging message is, when these things begin to take place, straighten up, raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near.